Hello, and welcome to the Sailing and Cruising the East Coast of the United States podcast. I'm Bela Musits.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
Hey, Mike, today's guest is John Sohl. He's a listener to this podcast, and he reached out to me via email. And it turns out we have several things in common. Turns out he's a ski patroller in a much nicer place to ski than I ski in. He skis out in Utah. So that was kind of neat. He's also a retired professor, although not in business, in physics. And he also enjoys sailing on other people's boats. And you and I have talked about that in the past, that there is something really kind of fun and interesting and unique about sailing on other people's boats. And also I find it to be a lot less stressful most of the time. And he's also a trailer sailor. Well, our first boat, a Catalina 22, was a trailerable boat. Although we didn't trailer it in many different places, we did get to experience some of that. So that's what today's topic is going to be about, is trailer sailing, because John does a lot of that. And he had a lot of great tips and a lot of great suggestions on how to sort of maximize your enjoyment when it comes to trailer sailing.
Great, Bela. One of the things I love about doing this podcast with you, other than the fact that you do most of the work, is that I love tapping into our community to find interesting topics. And the conversation with John fits right into this theme. He came to us, right, with this idea. So listeners, today, if you don't either live directly near a body of water, or you're someone who's just starting out and isn't really quite ready to make a big investment in a boat and a slip and a mooring ball at a marina somewhere, this should be perfect for you. And there should be lots of good tidbits and information.
Yep, that's absolutely right, Mike. So let's dive right into my discussion with John. Hello, John. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Bela. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. Now, you, like me, we have two things in common. We're both retired university professors, and we're both ski patrollers. And I guess the third thing we have in common is we're both sailors. So today's topic is going to be sailing, although I'm sure we could do multiple podcasts on the trials and tribulations of a university professor or a ski patroller. But you do something that I think is pretty unique. You live in Utah, which is a much better place to ski than I ski at, part of the country. But you also sail, and you do trailer sailing, which I think is very interesting. I have not had a lot of guests talking about that. For many, many years, I had a Catalina 22, which is a wonderful a trailerable sailboat that we took numerous places. And so I thought we'd talk about sort of trailer sailing to kick off with. But John, why don't you start off by first telling us a little bit about your sailing background and sort of how you got into it?
Sure. So try and do this in a really brief way. I grew up fairly poor in St. Petersburg, Florida, and I was walking home from elementary school, and in the 1960s, they would put rubbish at the side of the road from yard trimmings and stuff. You would come pick it up with the city would come around and get it. And you could put all sorts of stuff on there. You could throw old grills on there or whatever. They'd just come around and get it. Well, I was walking home and there was this pile of branches and stuff, and there was a little small boat on it. And I was looking at this boat while I'm walking down the sidewalk to walk home, and I'm thinking, somebody's throwing away their boat. I'm like 8 years old, 1965. And there's a man up on the porch, and I said, "Hey, mister, are you throwing your boat away?" And he said, "Yeah, it's got a lot of wood rot." "Well, can I have it?" "Well, it's going to take a lot of repair." And I don't know, maybe I can, maybe I can't. He says, "Well, yeah, I'd like to have it." He says, "Well, let me give you all the sails and everything. I'll get you the rudder and the dagger board." And so it turned out to be an old version of what today would be an Optimus dinghy or an Optimus pram. And so I got that, and then the man next door, my father had passed away, the man next door said, "Well, I'll help you fix it." Well, what that really means is I watched while he fixed it. He did a great job of fixing this thing. And then we had my mom had a friend a couple blocks away that was on a canal in a little tiny lake called Butterfly Lake. And so she agreed, well, we can just put it here in the side yard and you can just drag it out and launch it whenever you want. And so that's what I did. And I quickly ended up on the lee side of the lake. And now what? You know, tried to figure out what to do. And so I got on my bicycle, pedaled down to the Vinoy Basin in downtown St. Pete area. And I think you've been to the Vinoy Basin.
Yes, I
From
have.
one of your other conference. So I sat at the Vinoy Basin and went out on the pier and just out on the pier, and I watched sailboats going around. I thought, that's how they do it. Okay. So I went home, got on my little sailboat and tried it. Sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't. And I'd go back out, watch them again, and that's how I learned how to sail. I just taught myself and figured it out and watched other sailboats doing it and just kind of figured it out. And so I spent probably, if I spent less than 1,000 hours on that boat growing up, I'd be stunned. And so I just lived on that boat every spare minute I had, and I just loved it. So that's why I started with an 8-foot pram.
Yeah. You know, I think it's one of the great things about sailing. There's all these various different entry points. You can go to a week-long school
Mhm.
and learn how to sail, or you can, you know, get a sunfish or a little dinghy of some sort and just put it on a body of water and put a life jacket on and go try it. And in both cases, you'll figure it out through
Mhm.
some trial and tribulation and some experimentation. And and any of those paths are very, very enjoyable, which I think is the great thing about it.
Yeah, although I do think there is some advantage in starting on a small boat because for multiple reasons, some of your guests have mentioned in earlier podcasts, you really get a feel for the forces of the wind. You get a feel for the motions of the water and things like that if you are in a smaller boat, especially if you have a tiller. Once you get over the idea of you push the tiller the other way that you want to go, and you get this sort of gut feel for how the forces act. You had mentioned that you had taken the ASA courses after you had been an established sailor, and I did the same thing. So I decided about 5 years ago, yeah, you know what? I probably ought to get these certifications. What the heck? And in fact, that's randomly just sitting right here. And one of the people there, just like with you, he said, yeah, I have never sailed before. I just bought a 44-foot, something, and I need to know how to sail it. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, that's
Right.
that's a challenging way to learn.
Yes.
So I think there's a real advantage in starting on a smaller boat.
Yeah, I really agree with you about the small boat thing, because you feel every puff, you feel every wave, your senses are really very in tune then.
Mhm.
And I've heard many people say this. I don't know if it's true, but I'm sure some faculty member somewhere has done a study of this that says that all of the world-class racers, sailboat racers, all started on dinghies.
I wouldn't be
Right?
surprised.
They all had their foundation there.
There's another huge advantage, and that other advantage is when you crash it into something, the penalty for failure is much lower.
Right. Right.
And so there's an advantage there as well. You can experiment with less dread, and that allows you to try something you might not otherwise try because you don't really care if you actually bump the dock in your dinghy. Whereas bumping the dock at 5 knots in your new to you 44-foot whatever is a serious endeavor.
Right. Right.
So,
And I don't care how big your boat is. Most of the times the dock does not move. Your boat loses.
right. Yeah. No. And anybody who says they haven't crashed into the dock is either lying or hasn't been sailing for very long.
Right. So what's the current boat that you're sailing right now? Trailer sailing.
So our functional boat is a Seaward. We dearly love the Seaward boats for a variety of reasons. It's a 26-foot RK. The RK stands for retractable keel. So with that boat, I can sail, unless the winds are whaling and you'd be reefing anyway, I can sail with a pretty full sail plan up to about 10 to 12 knots in 18 inches of water. And so I don't need much water. Yeah, the boat's squirrely if you don't have much keel down. But I can lower the keel. Typically, most people with these will sail with the keel about 3 feet down. And that works well. And that's the fastest configuration. But if you have somebody on board, my wife, who does not do well with motions, dropping that keel 6 feet down makes for a very, very stable boat, and it's just it's a delight to sail if it's a little bit slower when you've got more keel down. So it's a very adaptable boat, and it's really easy to trailer, and that's a pretty key thing. When I suck that keel bulb up, a 2,000-pound keel bulb, torpedo up to the underside of the hull, I can load and unload it off the trailer as easily as a power boat.
Yes.
It just slides right on, slides right off. And so we really like this Seaward in a lot of ways. We spent about 40 days on it last summer, just on the primarily on one particular reservoir. It's a pretty good sized reservoir. A typical day when I look at the sailing logs, it was pretty common to sail 45 to 50 nautical miles in a day, all in this one reservoir. So it's not a tiny reservoir. And admittedly, there were a few times where we went back and forth the same area a couple times, but for the most part, we didn't really cover the same ground over and over again at all. So we spent a lot of time on there, and we were thinking to ourselves, wow, we really like that. We like the Seaward a lot. But boy, the bigger one, if you're on it for a month and a half, 2 months, which we plan to do because we're going to sail the eastern seaboard and also the Gulf Coast, when it's kind of like being in a van. You have this narrow center aisle, and then you've got stuff to either side, right? And people who do van life have sinks and beds and cabinetry and all that kind of stuff, which is much the same in the boat. But it's easier to go for a walk when you're in the van, right?
Right.
On the boat, even though it's probably a little bit more spacious, you don't have as many opportunities to leave. And so you're constantly going, excuse me, as you walk past each other a little bit. And that's fine for a week or 2 weeks. But a month and a half, we were thinking that would get kind of old, but we were going to deal with it because in a 32-foot Seaward, which was the next size up, but still trailerable in some generous term of trailerable, those are $120,000, and we just don't, teaching at a teaching university that's undergraduate only is not how you get rich quick. And so that was just out of our reach.
Yeah.
And then we found one that came up on the users group that had been damaged. And we looked at the damage, we looked at the kind of poor quality photos and thought, I can fix that. And so we jumped on it. And it turns out 5 people in the users group were all thinking, whoa, I'm going to go for that. We beat the others out by a day. And suddenly we ended up with this amazing boat for $29,000. And it's got I'm not going to just repair it. I'm going to have the factory, the guy retired, but he still does work on his side. And so he's going to replace it with a 2022 keel assembly for $11,000, and then another 4 to modernize the rudder assembly. And at that point, that's the main parts of this boat. And now I effectively have a 2022 boat, except the galley's a little bit dated. I can fix the galley. And we will be into it for $45,000. And we're getting a $120,000 boat. What's not to love? So we jumped on it. And so that's our boat that we have as our longer term sailing boat. And then our shorter trips will be on the 26.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you go on one of your shorter trips, so you trailer the boat.
Mm-hmm.
So talk us through sort of the process of getting ready to leave home. I assume your boat's at home. Right. When it's not in the water. I'm getting ready to leave home. What do you do to the boat to get it ready? And then then we can talk about trailering it. And once you get to the body of water, setting it up. So let's
Right.
start with leaving home.
So let me first start with a statement and a general statement about trailering boats. As you well know, no boat is perfect. Every boat ever made is a compromise of features. And that's true for anything from a sailing canoe to a super yacht. And the same thing is true here. So what we do for prep has varied from when we had our 19-foot boat to now our larger boats. And so for the most part, I keep the boats in the side yard pretty close, ready to roll. I use bungee cords to hold all the rigging from flapping while driving. But I don't want those bungee cords to stretch out. And so when it's in the side yard, I release those. And so what I need to do first is I get onto the boat and I secure all the loose rigging. And so that takes me about 10 minutes or so. Meanwhile, Sherry's busy grabbing stuff together and making sure we have the provisioning that we need. And I'm running through making sure that we have batteries for electric motors or for diesel and making sure we have all that stuff. So there's another 15 minutes or so. And then we're ready to tow. So it doesn't really take that long to start.
So John, let me ask you a question. Do you have a cradle for the mast for when you're towing it?
So on the seawards, there is a cradle system that's built into the mast or the keel post. Also doubles as part of a mast crutch. And then on the back of it, you have a regular crutch that goes in where the tiller is, or where the where the rudder is.
Yes.
And it sits on that. And then most owners will do something to keep the front of it from bouncing around unless you're doing a short trip. On the Potter, there was only the bow pulpit and the mast crutch at the rudder, and then the mast just sat on it. That mast was short enough that's not supporting it in the middle wasn't a big deal.
Yeah.
So basically, it's ready to pull out, and so off we go.
And how much does the whole package, including the trailer, weigh?
And of course, that's going to vary with the boat. On my Potter, which I dearly love that little boat, I could pull that with my Tesla and not even know it was there. With the 26RK, that's about 8,000 pounds. And that's a big boat. 26 to 28 is about the largest rational trailer sailor that you can get. And the reason is that as you get longer, you get wider. And the problem with being wider is that the highways are limited to 8.5 feet. After that, you need to get permits, wide load signs, and stuff like that. It's more of an effort. So that limits you to about 26 feet. And those boats are going to weigh in the 8,000 pound range, including the trailer.
Yeah.
So that's what you're pulling.
Yeah, I think my Catalina 22, if I remember correctly, the boat itself was like 25 or 2,600 pounds. And then the
trailer.
Yeah, and then trailer was like 800 or something. So, but then if you load it up with provisions and stuff, so you're pushing 3,500 pounds for sure. Yeah.
Right.
And my trailer had automatic brakes on it. Does yours?
Well, it depends upon how you define automatic. Surge brakes are automatic.
Yes, surge brakes, I should say. Yes.
So the surge brakes make a lot of sense for someone who lives in Iowa. Or someone who lives in Florida, and that may work fine.
Yes.
If you live in the mountains, surge brakes, no. Surge brakes are a disaster. And so the very first time I towed our 26-foot down, the main road that feeds to everything else is about 800 feet below our house, elevation-wise. We're at the top of the neighborhoods at the edge of the mountains. I'm surrounded by national forest land on the side of a mountain, which is why I have a trailer sailor, because I love my house and I don't want to move. And so I get down to the main road, pull over to test the trailer, and I can't put my hands on the hubs. They are so hot because it's just the brakes were on the whole way down. And so the very first thing that I do with any trailer sailor that I get that's heavier than a couple thousand pounds, 3,000-4,000 pounds, is I rip off any drum brakes that are on there, and I put disc brakes on, and I put disc brakes everywhere, except on the 3-axle. I only do the front 2 axles for pretty good reasons. And then I rip out the stupid surge brake, and I weld that tongue in place so it can't slip in and out to actuate anything, and that way just is fixed now. And then I put electric over hydraulic brakes on, and now I can control that electrically from the truck. And that works beautifully. I can be going down huge mountain pass roads, and if the trailer starts doing something squirrely, I just squeeze the little brake actuator, and the trailer pulls right back in tight behind the truck, and it works great. And so definitely get rid of the surge brakes.
Right. Very good. That's a great tip. And it's one my trailer had surge brakes on it, and it was pretty flat where I towed it. There wasn't any huge mountains out east, and it was never an issue. But I can certainly understand how that can be a real problem when you're going up and down mountainsides where you live in Utah. Very nice.
Yes, the surge brakes aren't a problem going up.
Right.
Going down.
They work perfect going up.
So anyway.
So when you go ahead, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Once you get to once you're trailering it, I mean, it's no different than trailering, a camper or anything else. It's maybe a little taller, but it's basically like towing any other vehicle. One thing that you do need to realize when you decide, hey, I want to have a trailer sailor, is that you now not only need to be careful and know the safety issues for sailing, but you also need to know the safety issues for how to tow and how to back up and stuff like that. And so those are skills that you definitely need to make sure you can get or can be comfortable learning if you get a trailer. So you get to the launch, and then what you do is you have to rig you don't have to, but the intelligent way to do it is to rig the system while it's in the parking lot. Your penalty for failure for dropping a fitting in the parking lot is way less than dropping it in the water. And so you rig as much as you possibly can in the parking lot, while at the same time making sure that you are prescient enough to look around you and realize, oh, there's a power line that goes across here between me and the ramp. Well, that's a no-go, right?
Right.
You got to make sure there aren't tree branches coming overhead. Right. You need to make sure you've got a clear shot to the ramp, and then you want to get yourself off to the side. We got hit in the parking lot while we were working on the boat by somebody who did not know how to pull a trailer. She had this big, long, empty trailer, fortunately, because she was bringing it around to the ramp. And when she went around our vehicle in our boat, she cut too short because she wasn't keeping track of where the trailer wheels, because the trailer is always going to cut a shorter radius than the tow vehicle. Well, the back of I'm up on the boat. I didn't see this because I had my back to it. And all of a sudden the boat's going, whoa, like that. I'm thinking, is the wind blowing us over? What's happening here? I don't have any sails up. How can I be getting blown over? And people are, a bunch of people start yelling, whoa, whoa. And I turn around and I see that she sideswiped us, and her trailer hit our trailer, tipped the whole boat up a bit. And so after that little adventure, now I find as remote and quiet a spot in the parking lot as I possibly can so that nobody can interfere with setting stuff up.
Right.
So you do all your rigging as much as you possibly can. And I like to put the boom on and everything. And I keep the main inside the boom, the cover that I put over the main. So I don't deploy any sails, but I have everything assembled so that when I slide it into the water, we park the truck and trailer. I meet my wife at the dock, and off we go.
Yeah. So John, when I had my Catalina 22, it would take us And when I mean us, it'd be my wife and I, or as my sons got older, my two sons and I, about from the time we pulled into the parking lot or to the ramp to the time we were back in the boat into the water, it took us somewhere, if things went really well, an hour. If things were a little more complicated, an hour and a half to sort of raise the mast. That was the big challenge for us. And the way we did it was I had basically a halyard that went to the top of the mast, and it was a rope halyard, and I tied an extra rope to that, and I'd have my two sons or my wife out in front of the boat, and it had a mast, is it called a tabernacle? I think a pivot where the mast, the bottom of the mast attaches to the boat. There's actually a pivot there, so I would put that bolt in so it pivots. And they would pull on that long line, and I would sort of walk the mast up and trying to keep it from going left or right. My main job was to make sure it doesn't fall left or right. And once we got it up there, they would keep tension on it, and I would attach the forestay and the sides. I had three stays on the side. And one of those I kept attached, as I could leave them attached while I raised it. And so those would keep it from falling left to right once it was on top. And then I attached the backstay, and it was stable. And then, of course, going through the tuning process of sort of tightening up all of those cables. So walk us through how you sort of get your mast up.
Okay, so that's going to depend upon the boat. I mean, obviously, you can get the mast up in a dinghy in about a minute, and just stick it into the mast base, and off you go. So our 19-foot Potter had a similar system to your 22-foot Catalina. And what that had, though, is some people, and I was never tall enough because I'm only 5'6", or necessarily strong enough to just lift the mast up myself.
To walk it up, right.
Yeah.
If two of us would do it, there were often times as my sons got in their teenage years, that's what we would do. The two of us would just grab the boom and sort of walk it up. Yeah. And the other one would connect the forestay, and we were done as they got stronger and I got weaker.
So funny how that works. So on the Potter, there was a fixed gin pole that was on the mast itself. And as the mast comes up, the gin pole moves with it. And what that gin pole did is it artificially moved your lifting point higher up into the air. And with that, I could just run the line back to the cabin top winch and just winch that thing up. And it came up really sweet and easy.
Oh, nice.
And
that's how it comes from the factory, John?
Yes.
Yeah.
Although I think the gin pole was an optional accessory, because a lot of people did just simply lift it up on the 19-footer. But I found the gin pole to work just really sweet. And so that system on the 19-footer, raising the mast was pretty quick, and getting the rigging in place was pretty quick. The entire process from the moment we parked in the parking lot to when we were launching, with practice, we had down to 45 minutes for all rigging, putting the boom on, getting having the furler ready, everything. We had down to 45 minutes. Now you up that to the 26-footer, and practice as we might, we were never able to get that shorter than about an hour and 15. As far as the mast raising is concerned, I left most of the shrouds in place, and both of these boats, the 19 West White Potter 19 and the Seaward 26 and the Seaward 32, have special baby stays. These are temporary stays that you put on both sides to keep the mast, supposedly, it's still spooky how much it moves, but those would keep the mast from swinging right or left as you bring it up. And so that allows you to just concentrate on raising it and catching the inevitable snags, because every time you bring it up, some shroud somewhere is going to hook on something.
Every time.
And so you could concentrate on those, and I could raise and lower the mast myself on both those boats just fine. On the 26, it's a fixed gym pole that goes in over the keel post, and then you remove that after you've raised or lowered the mast, and that again gives you a high lifting point. So the actual raising of the mast itself takes me about 2 minutes. So it's pretty quick. Then you've got to since I have most of the stays to stay in place, all I need to do is either tension them or I need to take and attach them, but that doesn't take that long. Most of the setup time is just fussing with all the piddly little stuff, making sure you've got all your cushions in place, making sure that you've got your boom on, making sure that all that stuff's in place. Right. The mast itself on the 26, I would say takes 15 minutes, including tensioning it. And I cheat on that because once I got all the tensioning and the mast trimming done, I went in with a can of spray paint and I spray painted my shackles or my turnbuckles so that I knew where to tighten it to. And then I would just tighten it to that. And the only thing that would cause that a little bit of a change is if it's warm or cold because of the different expansion rates between aluminum and steel. But it was usually pretty minor. And unless I was really worried about high performance, as far as I can tell, the difference between fussing with it and really getting the trim right versus just going to my preset points, if it made a quarter knot difference, I'd be surprised.
Right. Right.
And so I just pre-marked on the turnbuckles where to set them to, and I just turn it to that. If I'm feeling particularly fussy, I'll get my lose gauge out and check the tension, but otherwise I don't even bother. And that worked really well for me. So the actual mast raising and lowering is quick and easy, but it is not without risk. I almost killed my wife, and it was frightening. It was terrifying, actually. So the very first day we were on our 26 for more than just a few hours in the water just to test it around and make sure it didn't leak. Very first day we're out there, I discovered that the previous owner had not filled the coolant in the engine all the way. What they did is they put in the amount of coolant that Yanmar said to put in. Cool. Except since when the engine was put in, but they also added a hot water tank. And so there was a hot water bypass. Well, that's the same coolant. And that coolant wasn't accounted for. And so when they put in the amount that Yanmar says to put in, well, they did that, they closed it off, we're good to go. Well, I didn't know that, and we motored off to get off to a place where we could start sailing, and the engine didn't get too hot because it didn't have time. And then we were kind of doing some sailing stuff, then we decided to motor off someplace else, turn the motor on, 30 seconds later, a minute later, the hot temperature alarm's going off. It's like, oh no. So we're fussing with this thing, and we planned to spend the night out on the boat. And so we said, all right, forget it. We'll just use the sails for now. It runs for 30 seconds. For 30 seconds, I can line it up with the trailer and go for it. We got this. So we're sailing around, have a great time. And we get about probably 3 miles away and decide a couple of other little things, a brand new boat to us. And we're going to sail home. Let's call it. We're not going to sail. We're not going to sleep out tonight. We'll just go home and fix these problems. Wind dies. We get 0 wind, maybe a 1 knot wind. And we're 3 miles away. And so we thought, well, we'll just go slow. But the wind never picked up. We tried the motor, good 30 seconds. Finally, we got back. We were able to get it on the trailer, but what was going to be 2 or 3 hours to sunset is now 40 minutes to sunset. And so we get the boat on there, and now we're trying to take the mast down, and it's our second or third time ever at it. So we're trying to go through it, and now we're being eaten alive by mosquitoes. And so, the dusk mosquitoes are all out. We're being eaten by them. We're losing our light. We're frustrated. We've had a bad day because the motor wasn't working quite right. And I start to rig up the system to lower the mast, and there's two different ways you set it up, one for raising, one for lowering. Well, I actually set up the raising one by mistake. And I looked at that, and I thought, oh, dang. So I went over to change it. I forgot that I had undone the forestay, and it was all on the raising system. So I went to lower the mast, or I went to change the raising system, so I released it, but there was nothing holding the mast. And now this mast came thundering down, and the side stay missed my wife's head by about 2 feet. And I was just yelling, get out of the way, get out of the way, because there's no way I'm going to grab that rope. And then this thing is just thundering down. And in 2 seconds, the entire event was over. And she was able to jump out of the way, because if that side stay had hit her head, it probably would have killed her.
Right.
And so back to the statistic from Boat USA that you have referred to in your podcasts, Boat USA, if I remember correctly, says that 85% of all sailing accidents can be eventually traced back to schedule. In this case, we were rushing against sunset and biting mosquitoes.
Right.
And we were rushing, and that caused me to make a mistake. So you do need to be careful when you're raising or lowering that thing. It's a lot of material to be raising up and down.
Right. In almost every almost, not all, but almost every situation where something's not going like you want it to go, you can always take a minute to sort of step back, say, okay, what are we going to do here? Let's just assess the situation.
Yep.
And you can almost always do that. And that's something I try to remember. I don't always remember it, but I try. And sometimes my son is very good at that. He'll remind me, hey, Dad, hang on. Let's just take a step back. Let's look at what's going on.
And that's a valid point in another way. And that is that I can raise and lower the mast entirely by myself. And I have done it multiple times, especially in the side yard, but other places. I like to do it with my wife there or with a companion of there, because that person can go, oh, aren't you supposed to do that in this order? Because I, like you, have a checklist. And so having someone just looking over and double checking the checklist while I'm going through and doing the raising and lowering is a huge asset.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Very good. So
let me mention one other thing real quick on the setup, and that is, let's say, so the Seaward 32, I'm guessing is going to take me about 2 hours to set up and 2 hours to tear down. And the Potter I could do in 45 and 45. So if we just assume around an hour and 15, something like that, with practice, it's going to take you twice as long the first few times. But with practice, let's say hour and a half. So that's 3 hours. What that means, the downside to a trailerable boat is it makes no sense to go out for the afternoon. If you're going to go sail for 3 hours and it's going to take you 3 hours to set up and tear down and a half an hour to get there and a half an hour to get back, well, you're spending 4 hours getting there, getting back, setting it up just to go sailing for 3 hours? Well, that's just crazy. It doesn't make any sense at all. And so the one downside on a larger trailerable boat, smaller boats don't have as much of the problem here, is that it doesn't make sense to do anything less than a full day. And so that is a constraint. If you've got your boat and it's in the slip and you've got some friends in and you happen to be out at Narragansett Bay and you want to go out for an afternoon, you can do that. I can't do that. That I have a lot more flexibility on where I can go. I can go to a Tahoe. But your times are different. It doesn't make sense to do an afternoon sail. Period. Now, one way around that is one of the advantages of a trailer sailor is that the mooring fees are pretty much zero, right? You have to pay for your access to the ramp in some cases. In many cases, the ramps are free. But what you can do is at many places, you can have the dry storage, and a lot of people keep their big yachts up on the hard, and then when they go to use them, they just get the travel hoist to come launch them, and that works great. You don't have to maintain your bottom. But I can do the same thing with my trailer sailor. Just leave it on the trailer and leave the mast up, leave everything rigged, button the thing up. And when we did that, which we did several years at the local reservoir, if we ever wanted to go someplace else, no problem. We just drop the mast and go. But those times we wanted to go just for a short time, all I had to do is basically hook up to the trailer, launch it, put the trailer away, and we were in the water in 15 minutes.
Right. Right.
So that is an important option to remember, that you can, for the place you stay at most of the time, or perhaps all the time, if you store it dry, nothing grows on it. Okay, you might get a mouse, but you don't get anything growing on the hull. And it's really easy to launch because it just sits in the yard on your trailer and you're good to go. So that's another option.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, John, because it reminded me when we lived in California, we kept the boat on Folsom Lake, and they had a facility like that. You could keep your boat in the parking lot, and they had docks for only certain times of the year. So for times if you wanted to sail, you could sail there all year round, but the docks were not in all year round. But you could just keep your boat in the parking lot and with the mast up, because they made sure they cleared the trees and the power lines appropriately, and you could just launch your boat. And a lot of people did that. It was a very quick, efficient way of doing it. And it's certainly a wonderful option for people who trailer sail with boats where it takes you an hour or so or two to get ready to hoist the mainsail and all that stuff. And then you don't have to trailer your boat to and from the lake. It's there.
And added benefit. And the other thing with that is, if you have two tow vehicles, one that's not all that powerful, but gets really good gas mileage, and then you've got another one that's really strong, well, just to move it in, as long as
you don't need much
shipping, you can just use the small vehicle and save yourself some money on that part too.
Right. Excellent. So speaking of that, do you have any tips for trailering a boat, and in particular, all of the fun activity that happens at the boat ramp when you're launching the boat?
Yes, I have a couple of rules. One of them is I don't sail on Saturday and Sunday if I'm launching the boat. If I'm not launching the boat, I don't care. But if I'm launching the boat, I try to avoid, or what I do is I look at what is the normal traffic pattern. When, is it people going fishing early in the morning, or is it people who go water skiing and wakeboarding later in the afternoon? And you look for where the traffic pattern is, and then I don't like being crowded at the ramp. I just don't. Partly because it's less convenient for me. I can handle my boat. It's all the people who can't handle theirs crashing into things that I would just soon not be part of that drama. And so there are two places in life where you can sit and watch stuff if you want to see other people do silly stuff. One place is a boat ramp, and another place is where people get off a ski lift. And so if you want to watch people struggle, if that's something you like, those are the two places to watch it, right? And I don't want my boat next to somebody who just clearly doesn't know how to back down a ramp or how to get, whatever. I just don't want to be in the middle of that. We were at a spot where in Bear Lake, just a little bit north of here, which is a pretty cool place, where we launched our boat, and I got it clear of the ramp, and another sailboat just got launched, and somebody in a powerboat went down there and then backed their powerboat like 40, 50 feet back right into the rudder with their prop and the outboard motors, and their outboard motor props went right into this guy's rudder and chewed the living daylights out of this guy's rudder. And my boat was clear, it was on the other side of that sailboat, so I didn't have any problems. It's like, oh geez. And so I just don't, I look for when other people aren't there. That's my rule. And so I just try to schedule my time around other people. That I think that's far and away the most important thing you can do, just to reduce. You don't want to be there during crowds.
Right. A crowded boat ramp is not a good boat ramp.
No.
That's for sure. It's like driving in heavy traffic, and there's at least one person who's within eyeshot of you that doesn't know how to drive.
By definition, half of all drivers are below average.
That's right. That's right. All right. So we've been chatting here for almost 45 minutes, John. So are there topics that I haven't asked you that you think you'd like to share with our listeners?
Um, yeah, I think so. I started out with the idea that no boat is perfect. Every boat is a compromise. And the other thing that most sailors, especially new sailors, someone who might be considering going trailer sailing or what kind of boat do I want to get, you have two goals. One goal is what your brain wants to do. This is, these are my goals with sailing. And then the other goal is reality. And I've often noticed that some people, those align pretty well, but some people, what they're dreaming that they'll do on their sailboat and what they really do on their sailboat is not a particularly strong overlap on that Venn diagram. And I've seen people who are working full time, they've got a family, their life's busy, they have a big boat that they got, they're sitting in this, you've got it at a marina. And the reality is that they get maybe 2 weeks at a shot to go out on the boat, and they never really get a chance to go beyond what you can reach in a week or two for a casual sailor that doesn't have the confidence to try and really push it a long way in that kind of time frame, and then to get stuck with the schedule. The nice thing about trailer sailing is that I'm not pinned to a marina. I can pick any marina I want. And what we do when we're traveling is we use the boat as an RV. And so when we are on our way, we're going to be in a few weeks, we're taking it to Florida to get it repaired. And we're just going to pull into the local RV park along the route. And we have the funniest looking RV in the parking in the campground. And we just, live on that. But what the advantage to trailer sailing is, if you really don't have much time, is it allows you to have the flexibility to go to a great number of places in exchange for a little less comfort there. And so it does give you the ability to have different places to sail than if you have a very busy schedule and you're always sailing from the same marina, because that's where you are.
Right. Excellent point. Excellent point. So John, as you were talking about that, living on it as an RV, I wanted to ask you a few questions. The Catalina I had was pretty Spartan on the inside.
Mm-hmm. So was
right? So we had a porta potty.
Mm-hmm.
We had a little 5-gallon jug that we kept water in with a little hand pump and a little sink. And we had a cooler, and that was sort of it, and a battery for some lights. Talk about sort of the systems in your Seaward. It's a bigger boat, I think. And you mentioned it has an inboard engine, so it's it's a little more sophisticated than many of your typical trailerable sailboats.
Right. So the 26 RK, it has 55 gallons of water. It has like a 30-gallon waste tank or something like that. I forget the exact size. That one's got a pretty small fuel tank, but it's really easy to fill on the 26. The 32 have to fill it the way you fill yours. You have to pull into a fuel dock. But on the 26, I lift a little hatch, and the fuel tank comes out in my hands. I just walk to the fuel pump with it, put in, or wherever I want, stick it in the back of the car, drive it to the gas station, and put some diesel in it, and then I'm good to go. So I have 200 amp hours of lithium iron phosphate batteries in the 26, and I've got 400 amp hours in the 32. And so even if I'm not plugged in, I do just fine with all those resources. And so at a campground, the plugs are different. I discovered the hard way.
Of course.
Like, oh, dang. So I now have an adapter. So I can pull into an RV campground, and I've just plugged my adapter in, and I plugged my shore power into that adapter. And I have all the power I need. I've got air. I can't do air conditioning or heating unless I do an electric heater, because you need to have the water going through the heat exchanger. So that's one thing that you could do in an RV we can't do in the boat. But pretty much everything else is pretty comfortable. The
Yeah,
table is comfortable. It's tighter than an RV,
sure.
but it's
So you have a regular head with a like a hand pump to flush it?
On the 26, yes. And
Yeah.
so we cheat on that a little bit. We turn that into a composting toilet kind of sort of. And so what we do and that is my wife has figured this all out. We put a plastic bag in the toilet. I just I could pee and then just use water to flush it. She could pee, use water to flush it. Just pour water into the head and you're good to go. It just all goes in the waste tank. But it's actually not that hard to do a composting toilet kind of a thing where you end up effectively peeing in a bottle. Since we don't have a composting toilet, that's what we do.
Yeah.
You pee
Yes.
into a bottle. But we have a bucket that fits in the toilet. When she sits down, she just pees into the bucket. And then we take and transfer that either to the waste tank, which is easy, or we just take and dispose of it. And I do a similar thing. As far as going number 2 is concerned, we put a plastic bag in the toilet in the head, put some hamster bedding in there, just some wood chips, and then there's a special stuff that you can get that has the clever title of poo powder. And the poo powder is an enzyme that kind of breaks things down and it gets rid of the smell as well. And we just go in that, and then just like when you walk your dog and you pick up your dog's poo with a plastic bag, well, in this case, your poo doesn't stink because it's got the poo powder in it. It's got the wood chips in it. We just seal the bag off and verify that we can put it in the local trash first. And then we just throw it in the trash. And it works just fine. Of course, when we're on the boat, we use the waste tank and stuff like that because it's easy to flush.
Yes, very nice. And what kind of galley do you have?
So I'm ripping all those out. And every boat's a project boat. But we currently have in the 26 a microwave oven and a alcohol stove. And it turns out this is the best alcohol stove in existence, and it really gets hot. A lot of alcohol stoves are pretty tepid, but I can boil water on this thing in about 3 minutes.
Wow.
And so I'm ripping all that out, and we're putting in an induction stovetop and a microwave convection oven. And so the 32 is going to get the same treatment. So I'm going to have an induction stovetop and a microwave convection oven.
Very nice. I mean, that has all the creature comforts of home.
Yeah, and it fits nicely in the 26. And there's a lot of people who've done pretty much exactly the same thing. So it's not a terribly challenging thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that sounds wonderful. So, John, let's wrap this up. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you. I really enjoyed our conversation and learning about trailer sailing and how you do it with the Seawards. That sounds like a wonderful boat. Is there any last parting words of advice you'd like to give to our listeners?
Yeah, talk to people before you buy your boat.
Yes.
And really ask, this is what I honestly will be doing with this boat for a while. And remember, it was easy for you to buy the boat. Well, it's not much harder to sell the boat. And you can start with a boat that's manageable, learn how it works, kind of figure out, actually, I don't like this feature that much. And then after you've got some experience, now you can buy one that's closer to what your goals are. But be honest with yourself as to what you realistically are going to do, what your skill level, what your time constraints are, and get a boat that fits that, knowing that you're not stuck with that boat. You can always sell it and get the one that you like better. But if you spend all your time fussing around trying to pick a boat, you don't spend any time sailing. At some point, just get the boat and get in the water.
Right. That's great advice, John. It's great advice. Thanks again so much for being on the podcast. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Bela, really cool interview, and what a great story. And actually, I love the beginning of this, the serendipity of finding a boat on a trash pile when you're a kid, right? And this nice man who gave him all the rigging and the parts and everything. And then the story of the kind neighbor who helped him repair it. And I mean, just cool. And then he taught himself how to sail by watching. I mean, that in and of itself could be like, you know, a book, right? Fantastic. But the story today is about trailer sailing. So what were your big trailer sailing takeaways from your conversation with John?
Yeah. So to me, the things were getting a smaller boat, one that you can trailer. It actually opens up all sorts of possibilities to you that you don't have when you have a big boat like mine. One is there's lots of lakes all around this country. No matter where you go, there's lakes and reservoirs, streams that have been dammed up, and places that you can go sailing. And if you have a 20 or 22 or 25-foot boat, you don't need a huge body of water to go out sailing. Now, the other interesting thing is on my boat, if I want to go someplace, I want to go explore some other part of the country, I go at 5 or 6 knots. That's not very fast. It takes a long time to get there. If you have a trailerable boat, you can travel at 50, 60 miles an hour to get there. So it opens up all sorts of geography to you. And it's really, really easy to explore. Most of the times these boats are a little simpler. They're easier to set up. They're less complicated. They don't have as many systems on them. They don't require as much maintenance. So I think trailer sailing is one of these things that is often overlooked because, you know, you pick up a sailing magazine, you're not going to find a small trailerable sailboat in it. You're going to find a 45 or 50-foot floating house. You know, that's a sailboat. So this is part of sort of the segment of the market where a lot of people start. You can do it for not a lot of money, and it's really a lot of fun, and you can get to experience it, and you can get to experience it in a bunch of different places. So I think it's really cool.
Yeah, this makes total sense to me, Bela, and I'm glad that you and John had this discussion. I was really impressed with the system he had for getting everything ready to sail, and he knew how long it took, and really in a fairly short amount of time. I mean, again, thinking how long you have to travel to get to your boat, and then what you have to do once you get there, he can be kind of, okay, we're going to do this. They have their systems, they get ready, they have their lists, and off they go, and they can kind of get to the house at least and get the boat on the road pretty quickly. How does his experiences with trailer sailing compare to your experiences that you had with trailer sailing earlier in your sailing career?
Yeah. So, like I said, we pretty much trailered our boat in the beginning of the season, maybe once in the middle of the season, and then at the end of the season. So we didn't do a lot of exploring. However, we still went through a lot of the same processes. One is you got to set the boat up. It took about from the time we pulled into the parking lot to the time we were floating the boat off the trailer, it took us about an hour and a half to get the boat ready. Now, I will tell you that when I show up at my boat that's in the water, my Hunter 45, it takes me an hour before I untie the lines. So it's not that much different, right? So
Interesting.
You know, it's not like getting in your car in the garage and turning the key, opening the garage door and zipping out. There's a bunch of stuff I do. And that's because I leave the boat for a week or two, you know. It's been sitting there. I got to go over check a bunch of stuff. But anyway, back to our Catalina 22. Took us about an hour and a half. And what that hour and a half entails is fundamentally putting up the mast. And I had a system for that. And, you know, it was myself and two 7, 8-year-old sons and my wife. And it took us a while, but we had rigged a system where we could pull the mast up and secure it and get it ready for sailing. So that's the part that takes a long time. And our boat was pretty old, and some of the newer boats have developed easier, more user-friendly systems for sort of raising the mast, right? We did it by basically pulling on ropes to actually pivot the mast and lift it up. So the other neat thing was our boat, a 22-footer, was fine for the 4 of us staying on it overnight. We would go out and stay on it, 1, 2, I think 3 nights was the most we ever did on it in a row. And, that's great. Now, 4 adults, it'd be really tight. But 2 adults is fine. So if it's just 2 of you, it's great. Or you want to solo sail it, you can solo sail it. So anyway, for a family of 4 with 2 little kids, our 22-foot boat was just fine. So most trailer boats, when you start getting into the 20+ foot range, you have water. What kind of water do you have? Well, we had a 5-gallon jug that sat underneath the sink. We had a sink, and the sink had a little hand pump on it. So, you'd pump the hand pump and you'd get water out of the 5-gallon jug. We had a stove. We had an alcohol stove, 2-burner alcohol stove that we could cook on. We had a little grill too that we could, have off the back of the boat where we could grill stuff. We had a porta potty. So, it's a porta potty. There's not a lot of privacy because there isn't like a separate head, but the porta potty works just fine. And we had a cooler and an ice box, cooler/ice box. And that was it. We had lights on inside the cabin. We actually, on the Catalina, you could raise part of the cabin roof, and it had like a canvas window thing that went around it. So I could actually stand up in parts of the boat. Otherwise,
cool. So when you were at anchor, right, you could raise that thing up, right?
I can raise basically the cabin roof
like a
really
camper
good.
van.
Exactly, just like a camper van. Yep. Now, the thing that John talked about that I thought was really interesting, he says when they travel, they actually use their boat as a camper.
That's wild.
Yeah. So they pull into a campsite, and instead of having a camper on the back of his car, he's got a sailboat.
Huh?
Right. And they sleep in the boat. I mean, why not? It makes a lot of sense. I will say the one challenge is you need a ladder to get up into the boat.
And probably getting a boat in and out of the camp, some of those campsites, right? And the roads aren't great, and it might be a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah. Well, if people are in there with travel trailers,
same thing.
Right. A lot of those trailers are freaking huge. So, but I thought that was kind of neat. I had never really thought about that.
Especially if you're going to do a 2-day trip to get to the water, right?
Right. Exactly.
Night 1, you stay on the boat, and then you go on the water.
Exactly. So I thought it was really good. It was very interesting. I really enjoyed talking to John, and I thought he had a lot of great tips. And you're right. His story about finding the boat in the trash and then fixing it up. Again, we've talked about this many times. It's really a commentary about the sailing community and how helpful and friendly people are. So,
really amazing. And as he said, grew up poor, grew up in a tough family situation, it sounds like, right? And just, people are kind. It's just awesome. Gives you hope, right? Lots of crappy stuff going on in the world, right? But you've got stories like this, I think. And I think this could happen today, too. I'm quite sure, even though this was a long time ago, which is nice. So I think there's plenty of people that would help something like this. But nicely summarized. So I love this conversation. This was really cool. It's nice sharing a conversation like this. Maybe if you know somebody, if our listeners know somebody who's a new sailor or people think about starting to sail, this might actually be a really nice episode to recommend to them, to kind of, you can get into this and do this fairly inexpensively and at a fairly low cost of entry to get into the world of sailing. So fantastic. Any last thoughts on your side, Bela?
No, I think it's time to wrap this one up, Mike.
Sure. So listeners, thanks for joining us for yet another episode. We hope you found our conversation with John Sohl interesting and thought-provoking as we did. If you have questions about what we've discussed, please get in touch with us. Our email is sailingtheeast, that's all one word, @gmail.com.
And if you enjoyed the podcast, hit that follow button on your podcasting app. It helps other people find us as we turn up much higher in their search. And if you know of someone that would make a good guest on the show, let us know. We've had several people who are listeners who've been guests on the show. So we always find it interesting to talk to them. And I'm sure, I hope you enjoy listening to their stories as well. So hope to see you out there soon on the water. I'm heading out to our boat next week to start getting it ready. The snow is finally gone up here in upstate New York, although it was 28 degrees here this morning, but it's supposed to get up to 50 today. So hope to see you all soon.
Nice. And from over here in Münster, Germany, where the flowers are out and the trees are in bloom and the grass is green. Thanks for listening, and we'll see everybody next time.